We're now live on YouTube with the March 4th, 2019 edition of the Node.js and JS Foundation Bootstrap team. We're joined right now by 11 different individuals covering both foundations. We have a decently full agenda, so we'll jump right into it. The first section that we have is here on stage 3 proposals that are moving forward. So these various proposals are already in a state where they've gone to phase 2 from the committee, which means that they're ready to be approved by the boards. We have 4 pull requests open right now, specifically to move the community board reps to stage 3, to move the individual membership to stage 3, to move project progression to stage 3, and to move expectations to stage 3. The only proposal not included in this right now that's in phase 2, stage 2, would be the proposal for the CPC charter, which we just need to make a couple tweaks to before we can do it. Mike, or I'm not sure, I didn't say, or Brian, do you have any update from the foundations, from the boards reviewing these? If there's any objections or concerns with those 4 proposals moving to stage 3?
Yeah. Hey, Miles, this is Brian. So we've heard no objections at all from the boards on any of the proposals as presented. I will take an action right now to send an email out to the JSF board and specifically ask them again, because we just, by the nature of the way the calls worked out, we had more time to discuss this on the node board. So I will just double check, circle back with the JSF board, and we'll let you know.
Okay, excellent. So, we'll hopefully be able to land those in, do we want to say maybe 48 hours?
I think that's
review.
I think that's reasonable, Miles. As I said, we've gone through the mechanics of these. They've been presented in various forms as slides, and we've discussed through the ins and the outs of these. And really, we haven't heard any objections to anything. But just for the sake of completeness, I will just verify. And 48 hours sounds reasonable.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything else to add regarding the stage 3 proposals for right now?
I think I just had, a clarifying question around the staging process to make sure that my +1 is not confused. With any of these proposals that we're moving to stage 3, just looking at the documentation we have around staging process, stage 3 is complete, right? When we move it to stage 3, it's shipping.
Yes.
Okay. So with the idea of these proposals, is it that we have the overarching idea in place and the framework, and from there, the individual groups responsible flesh out further details? Or is it, because the CPC charter, I think, is a little easier to look at in that regard, because that's governance, and I would assume once that ships, that's the initial governance. Just because I'm in thinking about individual membership, that is the idea of the membership, but now all of the work has to be done to actually write out what that new membership is going to look like, including the umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just wanted to make sure,
I think if you're okay with punting on this for about 5 to 10 minutes, we have an agenda item that is hand-wavily described as just next steps.
Okay.
And that's exactly what I wanted to focus on in that portion.
Okay.
I just wanted to make order of things, but these are.
I'm sorry.
Please go for it.
Just wanted to make sure I wasn't +1ing things to go to stage 3 when that's pushing things through to a stage that isn't appropriate yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess from my perspective, it's I figured they were as far as they needed. Stage 3 was as far as they needed to be for where we currently are in terms of, setting up the foundation and so forth. So not that they're not going to be changed later on or extended, but they don't need any work Like they're completed enough now, and the rest is the details can be figured in or filled in or tweaked as those projects, like you said, or those pieces are picked up by the owning groups.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I would imagine, at least for myself, that stage 3 is kind of the shift from us discussing these ideas theoretically to beginning to like practically execute on them.
Cool. Okay.
Because we now know that we have consensus across all stakeholders. And I think also that like as the merger officially happens and things are more streamlined, and the CPC is formed, which we'll, get into, but like once that happens, we'll be in a much better position to kind of streamline some of this, but just making sure that all stakeholders are aware and on board and that we have everything necessary to kind of get things kicked off.
Okay.
Anything else for right now on these proposals, or are we good to move on to the next chunk of the agenda? Okay, so moving right into the discussion, the first bit that we have on here is for the name of the foundation. Brian, I believe you've been leading some of those conversations. Do you have any updates for us?
I have, and we do have some updates. Based upon the input from the community, we went out to a number of different community organizations, to the TAC, to the TSC, to the ComCom, as well as the Bootstrap community. We had a subgroup from here. We presented all of that to both of the boards, to the JSF board and to the Node.js board. And the consensus on the boards was to follow the community recommendation here of going with OpenJS Foundation and various permutations for that. So right now we are working on just a few additional things related to the name. There's some back-end work that needs to happen on this. We're also working as fast as we can on the much harder question of what should the logo look like. And that has gone out to various different groups, again, attempting to solicit feedback so we can present something to the board that shows maybe what the general trend is and what logos we think we really like of the options that have been created.
Excellent. So is that name official, or is there still a possibility of that name not landing?
Both boards have voted on it, and they both voted on the same name, which is great. So yes, I consider that official at this point.
Ooh.
Little happy dance.
I'm sorry that I'm slow to respond here. I'm excitedly sharing this information on the internet. Excellent.
Well, so before we share it, let's not take too much thunder out of the announcement. But
that's a good point.
Yep. It is not secret. Let me put it that way. It is not secret, but the people who are in the know are the ones who know about it. And I'd say when we do the announcement, let's attempt to surprise as many people as possible.
So to be clear, you're asking us to not tweet about it right now. Let's
not yet.
Yeah.
Not
okay.
Yet. Yeah. It's at this point, for all intents and purposes, we are getting very close to an announcement. So the less we can talk, the better. Not because we're trying to keep information up, but because we don't want to get people chattering so that they then miss the big announcement when it comes.
Yeah, basically, and all the details when it happens.
And this is Russ. Just also the name won't be official until the charter amendment's filed, which is going to happen at the same time as all the other heavy-duty mechanics actually happen, the signing of the agreements and all that. So it's not official until the filing's been made in Delaware.
Okay. Well, my internet excitement has been temporarily quelled.
David is a draft tweet, Miles.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Anyone have any questions or thoughts on this? Okay, cool. Brian, do we have a timeline on when the merger is looking to execute now based on all of this? Is this week? I guess next week is Open Source Leadership Summit.
We are working everything backwards from that date. And when I say everything, I mean making sure that press is briefed, as well as making sure that the various documents have been approved and voted upon. It means that we have a fairly heavy agenda in front of us for the next few days. It also means that we will be working pretty fast on things like the logo. It would be nice to have all of that stuff finalized. I mean, it's not obviously we can launch without it, but it's better if we launch with it. So there will be a number of things happening here between the different boards, as well as this afternoon at 12 Eastern, we have a call to discuss the logo with the naming committee. So we're working everything backwards from that date, but we are still pressing as hard as we can to get to that date.
Okay, excellent. Yep. So are there any other comments around the name, or are we ready to move on to the next agenda item?
Just for the minutes, what's the date I should add in we're working towards again?
We are trying for the 12th.
12th of March.
March. Yep.
Okay.
If there are no other comments on the name, I would just like to express my gratitude to everybody who's involved in this process. The reason we save this for the end is that naming is very difficult. Logos are also very difficult. And I just have been very pleased with the responsiveness of everybody who volunteered to participate in this. The feedback and the suggestions have all been really good. And it's been really quite nice to work with a responsive group who's willing to work together to come to a consensus across a very large number of people. So I just want to give my thanks to everybody who participated.
Okay, wonderful. And thank you, Brian, for all the hard work coordinating this. Agreeing on something like a name on such a short timeline is pretty amazing.
You're welcome.
Okay, so next steps. This is kind of a broad topic and meant for the majority of this call. So Tracy, aptly pointed out something that we need to figure out, which is kind of like all the work we need to do moving forward after this merge happens officially. This group is likely still going to have to meet for a little bit. There's still going to be work that needs to be done. Just kind of thinking out loud a few of the things that need to be figured out, at least from the community perspective. There's going to be some stuff the board needs to figure out as well. But from the community's perspective, the first and most important thing that we're going to need to do is actually found and charter the CPC and figure out the initial representation of the CPC, and then spin up the elections around board representatives and have a timeline around that seems reasonable. We're already in March right now, and at the end of May, we're going to have the collaborator summit. So I think that's a pretty reasonable timeline to try to get things together and maybe have, a first CPC meeting potentially with people in person around May. But we're also going to have to figure out how we identify all of the impact level projects and stuff like that. So, just trying to kind of.
Well, I think I've taken care of a big chunk of that on the JS Foundation side. Most of the projects have responded with their preferred initial stage selection.
Oh, excellent. That's really good to know. And Jory, is that information that can be shared publicly, or is that something that would be more of a private thing?
Sure, I can. I have it in a spreadsheet. I'm not sure, it's quite a few projects, so I can list it out loud and then drop a link to a spreadsheet in this document. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be excellent. At the very least, we can, in the doc, maybe note the ones that want to join as impact level for the sake of, just documentation and reference.
Should
Sure.
we maybe open an issue that we can fill in with, the next steps and use as a launching point for all of these?
Okay, that's a good action item out of this discussion.
See,
And I was almost thinking we could start to fill it in as part of our discussion here as well, but I guess we can put that in the minutes and then transfer it over.
Okay, so put it in the put it in an issue, or do you want me to read a list out loud, or?
I think maybe if you just paste, you have a link to the spreadsheet. If we just pasted that in the minutes, that would probably be.
Actually, I actually realized just now that it's a sheet in a table that I don't want to make public the whole thing. So let me just give me 2 shakes, and I'll make
if you just read through it and name the impact projects for now, and we get that into the minutes, we can transfer that into the issue, and that can be sufficient.
Okay, all right. Impact projects, Appium, Dojo, jQuery, and that's it for now, although I suspect that Webpack and or JerryScript will also respond with impact, but I haven't heard back with finality from those 2 projects.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. And did those projects that respond give an indication as to how many representatives they'd want to send to the CPC, or who those representatives might be?
They haven't. I have a gut feeling about how many and who those would be, but I sure wouldn't want to put anybody on the spot.
Yep, that makes a ton of sense. But so it looks like we'll have somewhere between 4 and 6 projects as the initial impact level projects, as well as then in turn, I guess somewhere between 8 and 12 members to the CPC, or I guess is 6 and 12, 4 and 12. It depends.
We'll see, right?
Yeah. And I think, Michael, that becomes like an interesting one to the charter of the CPC, because, for example, if we only have 4 projects and Node is the only one that puts forward 2 CPC members, just as like a theory, then we'll have 5 members, and then we'll potentially have 4 voting members representing the regular members and the other projects, in which case we may need to just like go back and think about some of those bylaws a bit, but we can play that by ear.
So what's the concern you're thinking of? Too many people, too few people? I'm not
it would be if there's an equal number of representatives for the impact projects as other projects.
Right.
That might be odd. But that might also just be intentional and okay.
I mean, I think that would be fine if that's how it, because we're going to add more impact level projects in the next year. There's no doubt in my mind. But the number of we have the 2 up to 2 who are not part of the impact, so I think it kind of it's fine. To me, I don't have a problem with it.
It's right now up to 4 that are not part of the impact.
Right. But 2 of those come from the CPC.
From the regular
members, yeah. Right? So we'd have to see who. Yeah, I guess
we'll play by ear. We'll see what.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the impact projects could submit additionals if they had a concern or whatever. So, but you're right. I mean, I think we're at the point where it's like we need to see what really happens versus worrying about it until we've got the real situation.
Yep. And I think like some of those other roles will take some time to bootstrap. I think it's just, about exactly who is that team. And it may very well turn out. And I guess maybe this is a good next step conversation for us to have is what should we be doing with this meeting and this time and this slot? Because in theory, these times have been carved out based on who in theory can be the participants for the new CPC meetings. So do we want to just kind of, in the same way that we converted the prior Bootstrap, the prior kind of board meetings around this into the Bootstrap meetings, should we just convert the times that we've been doing right now for the Bootstrap meetings into kind of the inaugural cross-project council meetings?
I think so. Well, I don't know about the CPC. Maybe, yeah. I mean, we need to still have a focus on all the next steps.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, those will be getting the CPC and the other groups up and running. And then I think it's a natural to say, well, okay, do you just continue that same time, or once you have that group, maybe there's different times that make sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it seems like we have people are on board with maintaining this time and frequency for now, and then just kind of iterating as we go. Okay, great. So other things that we need to do. So we'll need to bootstrap the CPC. The community is going to need to elect new board members. I believe that this is kind of this is going to have to happen though after the CPC bootstraps. So I think it will now be on the boards to come up with a proposal as to what happens with the community representation in the meantime. Maybe we can get that brought to the next meeting, with just a heads up about kind of what the plan is to do there. Brian or Mike, do you have anything to add in about that?
I can put it on the agenda. Yep. I mean, the next meeting's in what, a week? Yeah, exactly a week. So yeah, I can put that on the agenda. The way we handled it so far was to simply extend the term of the community representative. So we can do that again. I mean, I say we can do that again. I say we can propose that again. There's precedent for it, and it went fine.
Okay.
I guess because there's three, right? It's like the transition from the TSC board rep, the ComCom board rep, and the community board rep.
And the JS board TAC reps.
TAC.
So I think we've got to
Sure.
make some changes to get some sort of continuity representation. And hello, and my apologies for arriving late.
Okay, so next steps that we definitely need to do, just kind of reiterating from where we started in this conversation, we need to bootstrap the CPC. We've identified 3 JSF projects and potentially up to 5 JSF projects that are interested in coming in as impact level projects. We are going to have to go through and make sure that we have consensus across all of those projects, that all of those projects should be impact level projects. And actually, I mean, like, this isn't something that we need to dig into too much, but we'll also have to figure out, if all these projects get kind of brought in based on their current standing, or if we need to make the rules for the impact level projects based around, the capabilities of those current projects. We then...
Just a quick question. We have the list of the JS ones from the node. The node one, obviously there's Node.js. Was in different pictures, I've also seen Express in that list. Is that?
As far as I know, neither Express nor libuv have expressed interest, but it's definitely something that we should follow up with them on.
Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'd heard on the libuv front. I just didn't know for the Express front.
Is it safe to assume that they'd be listed as separate projects now?
Yeah, I believe that the intention was that they would be separate projects within the foundation, most likely at the sandbox stage.
Okay, just want to confirm.
Just a thought right now, since we do have, a large number of the people who have been on the calls for a while. and we haven't had an explicit process around this. Does it make sense that perhaps the jQuery, the JSF Foundation project, who identify as wanting to be impact, kind of make that initial CPC, and we from there kind of build out the policy and just kind of work moving forward? Because perhaps what I was suggesting before might end up becoming like kind of territorial or kind of move us away from moving forward. So does that seem reasonable to people?
I would much prefer that. I mean, I think that inviting, those who say, "Hey, we have big projects and we want to be involved at the impact level at this stage. Like we need more help and more engagement than just saying, okay, well, great, you said you wanted to. Now we need to go back and, validate that these requirements that we haven't really fully settled on yet have been met." I'd rather invite those people to be part of firming that up as opposed to.
Yeah, that's my preference too, especially since we have written into the project progression a yearly review.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, at the end of the first year, I think like it's possibly also that in terms of the requirements and something, we should figure out like some period of time, is it 6 months or whatever, for projects to kind of work to come into line with what the requirements would be for like a new project coming in.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, just giving them, a time, letting them come into the conversation, figure out really what these stages are, what they mean, and what value they're getting out of them. And, especially for those that have initially elected impact stage, giving them a little bit of a transition period if there's changes they need to make. So some of the projects now, for example, knew that they wanted to do this, and they're actively working on their defining their like governance doc and that kind of thing. So, giving them that time to come into alignment with what the shared expectations are is preferred.
Yeah, that also seems like a nice pragmatic approach to determining what those are, because I think if it's just one project or kind of like, a handful of projects that already meet it, it's not likely to be a flexible process based on, what the reality is of projects within the foundation. So it seems like something that should be working towards where people are at and where they want to be, rather than just kind of where some people are at and think others should be, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, certainly working through that. Like I think setting some timeline is good just to make sure that there's some focus on it. But then as we work through, we may find out what doesn't work or what does, and adjust it along the way.
Yeah, that annual review sounds like a very reasonable way to do it. And it also seems like a great way to flesh out what does the annual review even mean? And like, is it the kind of thing that you come out of with, like, if you don't pass if you're not aligned with certain things, does that mean you come out with like a performance improvement plan, or does it mean a degradation in the ratings? Like, none of that. Like, this should all be kind of set up for success and assuming best intent out of people. So it seems like the kind of thing where even with a yearly review, it wouldn't be like a yearly review to decide if the status sticks, but a yearly review to set goals, if anything.
Right. And I think you start by self-identification, which we've done in a bunch of other places. It's like, well, do you think this is still the right level for you?
Mm-hmm.
And, if the project says, I think in many cases, if it's truly not anymore, the project may look at it and say, you're right. It's not. Or, yes, it is. And it's only in, the extreme cases where there'll be like some disagreement anyway.
Yeah.
But it's good to have a review.
Our projects are really pragmatic. They're not interested in biting off more than they can chew. They do have goals. So they're it's not a status thing or anything like that. So.
Okay, great. So kind of going through it one more time, is there anything else people wanted to add to that thought? Okay, so we've identified the impact, the most likely impact projects. It sounds like there's just a tiny bit of follow-up to be done just to confirm. We will continue with the Bootstrap times that we currently have to bootstrap out the CPC that will include representatives from the identified projects. Then following that, I guess it would be up to the CPC to start doing stuff like rolling out the individual membership program. Tracy, do you have any specific thoughts around that?
That's a good question. I think I'm trying to think from a timeline perspective. I think that it might be interesting for us to do a little bit of a short-term roadmap. Not just because the individual membership takes quite a bit of time, and as soon as, I mean, really, I guess we could get going on working on that before, ink is signed on the execution steps. But what I was just thinking was that we're talking about all of these elections on the project's side and for directors potentially. And granted, that takes a little bit from the board for input before that would move forward. But I think we're going to overwhelm with the amount of things happening that are important decisions to be made. So I'm wondering if we need to sort of write out like these important things that need to happen as soon as the foundation does kick off.
That's what I was thinking, an issue where we actually had like bullet checkpoints that we can say like this has to happen. And then we can.
And it's not to say that one is dependent on another, right? No. Some of these things, most of these things can happen concurrently.
Yep.
I don't think it's a good idea necessarily to do that. Because just again, like, I don't want people to miss out on things that are happening because there's so much happening. So I think it's good for us to pick battles while not dragging it out too far.
So are you saying that we should defer on the individual membership program until other things bootstrap, or?
No, but the CPC is responsible for the individual membership program. So like I'm wondering if like there are individuals who we can work on the individual membership execution and, sort of not charter because it's a program, but we can outline all of that. But since the CPC is responsible, I think that I'm wondering what y'all think about, like, does it need to wait until the CPC is formed to move too far, like into execution steps beyond this proposal stage?
Like, I guess from my perspective, if there's something actually being launched or started, then I guess I'd agree with you that the CPC, since it's responsible, kind of needs to be together to just say, yeah, that looks good or not. Short of that, though, I don't see any problem with, if for example, you were like, hey, I'm really interested, I'll volunteer to push this forward to get everything started and the ducks in line so that when the CPC is formed, it's like, hey, here's the proposal. And if it looks good, let's go, right?
Cool. Yeah, that sounds good. And we can just go ahead. Yeah, now that we're moving it to stage 3, then we just form a new, I guess a new subcommittee. We don't have to call it that. A new group until we know what that.
Exactly, and then hopefully that subcommittee just becomes the committee who pushes it forward. As delegated by the CPC. Because I can't imagine why the CPC would say no, we don't want you to do that, right? So.
Right. Yeah, and if anything, we want to again take advantage of the momentum of announcements around the new foundation in order to announce eventually the launch of the new individual membership program.
Yep. And, the model will be to have as many different groups and subcommittees. So if there's people who want to step up and do stuff, I think we should start encouraging that even before the CPC is ready to give the final yes or no kind of thing.
Cool.
Okay. So with that being said, is there anything else to add right now to kind of this next steps phase, or does it seem like we have kind of enough captured right now to open up an issue identifying stuff?
I'm happy to take the action to open the issue if everybody can then post as comments, things that need to happen. and I'm happy to sort of curate that into the list in the issue, and we can go from there.
Okay, excellent. So moving on to the next issue, we have two more issues on for right now. First one is number 96. It's a draft proposal language for project exit clause. This is from Jory. Jory, would you like to present this?
Sure. So this is obviously not actually a proposal yet, but it is capturing a concern that was raised. Although I don't. To be frank, I don't see any. There's no projects that are like, oh, we want out of this. We don't want to come along. But the question was, if we did, what are the steps and what are the requirements? So, for example, a lot of the projects may not know that because they are in the foundation, their IP has been moved into the protection of the foundation, which is a C6. It can't go. It can only go to another C6 or a C3, and so just things like that. I don't again see this as being an urgent need, but something that projects have expressed a desire for clarity on. And so I don't even think it's a stage 0 because there's not even proposal language.
Okay. I guess with that being said, maybe there isn't need for too much discussion on this for right now. Does anyone have anything to add to this item, or are we able to move on to the next one?
Should we just add that as a list of the Bootstrap issues we need to cover?
Yeah, that seems reasonable. I'm dropping the Bootstrap agenda for right now, Jory, unless you see a problem with that, and we can add it back when we have something more to discuss.
Yep.
Excellent. So the next item that we have on here is another one that I think is worth digging into a bit. Project-directed funding. This is number 90. I believe that this one is also Jory's. Would you like to present this one?
Yeah. So this one came up, I believe, in an ad hoc meeting, if I recall correctly. But the question came from projects, how do we think about guidelines around using tools like Open Collective, et cetera, to fund specific efforts. We have some projects in the JS Foundation that have used open collectives or are using open collectives. And, how do we help support them in their different goals, but also make it clear that, say, the activities on the open collective aren't really being overseen by the foundation. That's one component of it. Another component of it is how might a project accept, say, a larger donation from a corporate, sponsor via the foundation, which we don't really have a means to do. And that is certainly something that we would need the board to partner with us on, because there's probably some bylaws related rules and what have you to be, and Mike and Brian and our Stephen and Andy, I'm sure we'll have a lot to say about that. But in the interim, we have the JS Foundation projects are using a disclaimer on their open collective pages, just to make it clear that the project maintainers are really driving the efforts that are happening on their collective pages, and that is distinct from the activities of the foundation. And we'll probably think of a few more nice supportive things to do for projects in the interim that are low effort, but clarifying for projects. So.
Yeah, I think certainly the how did, we'd had some projects, as we discussed, as saying, well, their focus is, for example, Node or one of the other projects, and they would like a way to be able to, make their membership contribution a little bit more directed than just joining the overall foundation.
Right. And so can they earmark, percentage of their membership dues, or in addition to their membership dues, do they need to make a contribution? And, those kinds of questions, which are really, customer research, right? What do our projects want and need to be able to do? And what do our members and the corporate sponsors of open source want to be able to do? So starting that.
I think one model, I think it was the Apache Foundation, where like you first have to join the foundation, but then you can actually, get an additional membership in a particular project or something like that. But there's a bunch of models, as you said. It's figuring out what's going to work for people.
Exactly. And, the LF does that a little bit with certain of its foundations, where you pay a membership fee, and some of that goes to your LF membership dues, and then another percentage of that goes to, the project specific that you're going to sponsor. So I think it just requires that that conversation to be had, and we've had our irons in very many fires, and this could be and this seems like an important one to look at whenever we're bootstrapped.
I think I have a question from Brian from this. Is this something that the boards would, I think this is a conversation the boards would discuss, or the new board would discuss, right? Because I think that question around like individual memberships within, or like being a member of an individual project would be something the board has to decide on, right?
So there are, the short answer to your question, Tracy, is yes. These will be questions that the new board will have to address. And I think there are a couple of different flavors of them. One is certainly in the context of the individual membership program. The other one is in the question of crowdfunding. And these are all things that are being really kind of actively looked at right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is not something we're going to be able to solve in the next week. Yeah. It's definitely something that will be a very high priority on the new boards.
And with the crowdfunding, we didn't talk about, but during the Bootstrap sessions since the fall here, I believe we had conversations around the earmarking, and that I thought we had, like, the challenge with earmarking is that you have to be really careful. Like there's from like one from like a stewardship perspective, like what happens if a vast majority of companies want to donate money but earmark it to one project.
Yeah.
And sort of like, what do you do when other projects have needs, and sort of like, what's the point of them being part of this umbrella organization if we're not investing in all of these awesome projects that, some are, in this case, like, we've got a number of projects that are very stable and have been around for a really long time and are not as flashy and don't draw as many corporate, sponsorships, but are really important to our ecosystem. And then we have newer projects or bigger projects that are really flashy right now, but maybe won't be in the future. Mm-hmm. And so like the idea of earmarking can be really challenging because it's not really the point. And part of our duty is to help educate people who come to us who want to donate money, to make sure that they understand that.
Yes, that's a great point, Tracy. I mean, I think virtually everything that I've seen in terms of the aspirations for the new foundation is that it's focused on ecosystem. I mean, it's obviously focused on individual project support, but ecosystem is a massive part of this. The other thing to consider is that, when you're bringing up questions of crowdfunding and things like that, that's an extra foundational activity. And one of the things that, Sajori had mentioned that, we've been working with various projects which have decided to go the open collective route. One of the things that we've asked is that they put some text on their website that says this is an activity that is outside of the operations of the project itself as it relates to the foundation. So, maintaining essentially clear lanes is a big part of this as well.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, as we said, we're not going to solve this because I think, Tracy, some of the concerns that you mentioned, I don't think anybody would go for the, hey, all of the money goes to, you can earmark all of your money, right? So it comes down to making sure that you get the balance of, well, you have to join and there's enough money to support all projects. But if there's, while maybe letting directed funding happen, if that makes it so that we end up with a larger overall membership, right?
Yeah, you also have the problem though of like money moving on from year to year. Like if something is earmarked,
Yeah,
it's very complicated.
Yeah, there's lots of complications. So,
yeah.
But I think we just need to work through options. And to my mind, the first thing would be to just go to all of our existing members and ask them if it's even interesting. Like if the answer is, well, nobody's interested, then it's an easy decision, right?
Yeah.
To not do it.
Yeah, to not do it, exactly.
And the other thing is, to what end is a project, raising money? There may be very well a bunch of projects that it's easy for them to get donations and take donations, but why are they raising money? So that's another kind of factor.
Yeah, why can't that money flow through the foundation as an example?
So I think one of the things to consider here and that we'll have to figure out is like, we talked about having like a budget authority and a decentralized budget authority. This is something that we talked about the CPC overseeing, or a subcommittee maybe being supported by foundation staff having to oversee this. I could very well imagine that project directed funding could help supplement that budget or change what the ask is from the foundation itself. But the definite risk there is kind of undermining the overall process of the foundation's budget. But with that being said, there are multiple projects from the JSF already that have open collectives and are using those open collectives. And I think we want to find the balance between ensuring that everything we're doing is like legal and not putting at risk the foundation's nonprofit status, which as far as I know is not an issue right now. It's just kind of like a general concern that could come up around there. But also making sure that we're giving projects the freedom and space to do things the way that they want to. But yeah, like finding the balance between that and centralized funding definitely seems like the primary challenge here.
One thing, maybe just kind of to close off the thought here, that I think, Michael, I think it was you who raised the question of what about things that require multiple years of funding? This is, historically the way these sorts of things have been handled, at least on the board level, is to have directors who are engaged and who are paying attention and who can say, this is something that we're willing to consider as a multi-year project, or we want to stick to funding things which we know that we can contain and which we know we can complete and complete well. And fundamentally, that really comes down to having strong representation on the board, with people who are active and people who are engaged and people who understand their duties as the custodians of the budget, or at least the custodians of the bank account.
Okay, excellent. Is there anything else around the project-directed funding that we should dig into for today, or do people feel kind of satisfied with where we've landed on it for now?
So the last question I'll throw out is, I did create the issue, and as we discussed, I put two sort of sections, a bootstrapping section and a post-bootstrap. And I was thinking this one would go under the post-bootstrap. Like it's something we want to get to, but we don't necessarily need to focus on until we've got the CPC bootstrap. Does that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. That absolutely.
Okay, so it's kind of, it'll be in that list so we don't forget about it, but basically until we get through the bootstrap, we won't worry about it, is kind of the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great. And then I'll go ahead and I'll just add the Bootstrap agenda label to this one. because it seems like a good place to centralize some stuff. And I like, for those of you who are not looking right now, Michael's also put the tracking issues for the specific things that we're working on. So we can tie those action items to other tracking issues. So we only have about 4 minutes left right now. I guess the one thing that's worth bringing up really quickly before we break is next Monday is, a travel day for myself, and a bunch of us are heading to the Open Source Leadership Summit, and we also have a face-to-face board meeting. I would like to cancel next week's meeting. Does anyone object to that?
Nope. That'll be that. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I think I have a hard time having representation here next week.
Yeah,
that's what I figured. I've canceled my personal calendar event, and I'll go through and clean up the bits on the Node.js calendar as well. We will reconvene as a group on Monday the 18th at the 9 a.m. time once again, potentially with a few more representatives from other projects. I guess one of the things that we will also have to figure out, and Jory, maybe you and I can follow up on this, would be maybe kind of just like some sort of communication to both foundations after the merger has officially happened, as well as kind of explicit next steps so people know where to show up and what to do. Because at the very least, we're probably going to want representatives from those projects attending the Bootstrap meetings as we form the CPC.
Yeah, and there was a open question about whether we were going to do another town hall, I think, or am I imagining that?
We were talking about doing that. I do not think that we've managed to get the resources together in time to do it. We could potentially do it this week. It may make sense for us to do a town hall after the merger. At this point, my intuition on it is that, a lot of the things that are in place, it's probably hard for us to change in the next week. But, like all of these things are still malleable moving forward after the merger officially happens. So perhaps we'd be better off doing a town hall after a couple Bootstrap meetings after the merger, once we kind of know the structure. That can be an update on, hey, we're forming the CPC. Here's what's going on. Here's how to get involved. Does that seem?
That makes sense to me. That makes the move. Yeah.
Because if we did another town hall right now, it would be much of the same content from the last one, which perhaps is useful for us to do as well. I just want to kind of set the expectations correctly and make sure people can engage.
One of the things we could do, Miles, so to your point, yeah, I agree. I don't think much of anything really has changed, or that which has changed has been fairly small. One of the things we could do is ask for the foundation marketing folks to continue to point to the previous town hall and just basically make sure people are aware of it so they can go back and see it. And that would be maybe a little easier than scheduling a call to say everything is still virtually the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe list the people, or, here's the town hall you can go take a look at. If you have feedback, here's your channels. Sure. Whether that's individual people or opening issues or whatever, just make it clear, like, hey, okay, you can go watch this, which is good for information, but if you want to communicate back, here's the channels that you should use.
Sure. So I'll take the to-do then to get that in front of the marketing folks.
Okay, excellent. We are at time now. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream. Thank you, everyone, for joining today.